In this video, what we are going to do is we're going to take a look at menu items. So there's a handful of really neat things we can do with them. Like, for example, we can turn them into radio buttons or checkboxes. We can also do things like group them together and act on them as an individual group. And we're also going to take a look at how fragments interact with menu items, and we're going to take a look at doing submenus. So there's basically just a lot of odds and ends that we're going to be covering in this video, and I kind of wanted to consolidate it all into one video because these concepts aren't too related to each other, but they don't take a whole lot of time to explain. So I guess let's just go ahead and get started, and we're going to start with checkboxes. So checkboxes are pretty straightforward. I'm sure most of you guys have worked with one before. Let's jump into our resource menu activity main menu file. And what we see here is we have this another thing, right? So if we look at our preview window, our awesome preview window that we got working in the last video, we have this overflow. And what I want is I want there to be a checkbox right there. I want there to be a visual representation that another thing is either on or off. Now to do that, we can use a built-in feature of Android as far as menu items go, and that is setting a simple attribute. So I'm going to come down here, and on this item, on this particular item, by the way, pro tip, you can click on the item itself in the preview window, and it'll focus your keyboard cursor right onto the item itself. So that's a really handy way to navigate your menus. Okay, so I'm going to add an attribute, and really not surprisingly, the attribute's name is going to be called checkable. And if I set checkable to true, notice what magically happens. Not surprisingly, a checkbox appears. Now, I want to point out that these checkboxes are only going to work on our overflow menus. They're not going to work on our action items being the ones that are inline on the toolbar. So if you wanted to implement some toggling ability up there, you would have to implement it manually, and it's really not that easy or not that difficult to do. You would basically just keep track of if the things are checked yourself, and you would do something like change the icon to a different image if it's checked and a different image if it's not checked. But when it comes to consistency and ease of use, if your item happens to be in an overflow menu already, it's very, very easy to go ahead and throw a checkbox into it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, in preparation of what I'm going to be doing with groups, I'm going to make some changes to this item. First of all, I'm going to change its name to menu show group. And then I'm going to change its title to show group. And I'm going to leave it like that. Now, if I hit play, you'll notice something interesting when I get my menu. So let's bring my little VM guy over here. Now, when I hit this overflow menu and I select show group, now you would expect what would happen is we know the button got clicked because the title was shown. Remember how we set up that code that whenever we click a menu item, the toast shows the title of the menu item we clicked. And you'd expect that after clicking on it, I could come back to the overflow menu and it'd be checked. However, you'd be wrong. That seems like a sensible thing, right? It's checkable. You would assume that Android does something with that information we gave it. In reality, the concept of something being checkable in Android is visual only, meaning we are responsible for determining when the thing is actually checked. Now, fortunately, we don't have to do anything manual like swapping background sprites or anything like that. Android will do that for us. But we do need to determine under what conditions do we want this item to become checked or unchecked. Now, under 99.9% of the circumstances, you might be working with a checkable menu item in your overflow of your action bar. A lot of Android-y words there. You are basically going to want it to be checked when you click on it and unchecked when you click on it again. And fortunately, writing that code in a general way that will work no matter how many checkable items we add is really easy to do. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump all the way up into my main activity. I can also get to my main activity by clicking on this main activity and saying open main activity. The reason, again, I can do that is because I associated this with main activity. I also do believe I can control click right here. Wow. I've never done that before, but it seemed reasonable and it works, and that's cool. I love when reasonable things work. unlike this whole checkbox business. Which, back to that, what we're going to have to do is in our on options item selected, we're going to have to write code that will basically, in English, what it's going to do is it's going to check to see if the menu item that was clicked is a checkable thing. Does it have this checkable, where are you? Checkable attribute set to true. Now, if it does, we want to set its check state to true or false. And the value we set is going to be the opposite of what it is currently. So that's really easy to do. If item dot is checkable, then item dot set checked equals not item dot is checked. And that's it. Now, this bit of code will work on every single item, or every single checkable item we add to this particular menu. It's a really nice little piece of code that'll handle those sort of circumstances. Now, of course, we could add exclusions to it if we didn't want certain checkable things to behave like that. We could add exclusions to it in the if statement, but in this case, we are not going to deal with that. So now let's go ahead and hit play and see if our awesome checkbox works. So we open up our overflow menu, we select show group, we open it up again and check that out, it's checked. Click it again, it's unchecked. Click it again, it's checked. It's magic. It's not, actually, it's code. Alright, so that is checkable stuff. It's really, I was about to say it's really not that exciting, but I think it is kind of cool. It's just you kind of need to know what to do to work with it. And hopefully I explained that well enough. So let's go ahead and move on to groups, because I like groups. I think groups are cool. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with groups. Primarily the purpose of a group inside of a menu is to is to group menu items together, is to act on menu items as one. So let's say, for example, you have a set of menu items that is only appropriate to use these menu items in particular circumstances. Like, for example, if you have a file browser application and you're looking at a file and you have a couple of these buttons in your action bar called things like delete or edit or change permissions or something like that. And if the file you're looking at is, let's say, read-only, then things like deleting or editing make no sense, and you shouldn't be allowed to perform those actions. So instead of going through each one of those items that you want to disable in your menu, you can instead group all those items together and enable and disable them as a, well, group. So let's go ahead and do that. It's pretty simple. You simply specify multiple menu items in a group element. Now, of course, to make the group useful, the only way to make the group useful is to give it an ID. I want to point this out really, well, no, I'll talk about it again in a second, or once we talk about radio buttons. But for now, just know we need an ID because we need to tell the menu which group to enable or disable. Now, as far as the name of this, I'm going to call it activity main menu, I'm going to say menu group. I'm feeling very uninspired in my naming department today. So then inside of this, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up an item, and I'm just going to give it titles. It doesn't matter really what these items do in particular, or if they have... Oh, come on. Why can't I type all of a sudden? Like delete, edit, what was the other one other example I gave? Like change permission. Okay, so we have these three items. Of course, my indentation might look weird to you. I'm just so used to these items having multiple attributes. I'm kind of preparing, generally speaking, when I do this sort of thing. If they might have multiple attributes, I'll separate out their attributes like this. Of course, the code could have been written and would have been cleaner if I had written it like so. So you can do it either way. In this case, since we're not adding any more attributes to our items, we can leave it like this. Anyway, so that is our group. As far as what the functionality is, what functionality changed, not much, honestly. It's pretty much going to do exactly what you'd expect it to. These items are added to the action bar, and they happen to go into the overflow menu. However, what we can do is we can now enable, disable, make visible, make invisible this entire group in one line of code. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, the reason I really wanted to do this example was it requires something that we don't quite have yet. And a really important concept when working with menus is being able to do this. The question gets posted. I've seen quite a few questions on Stack Overflow about this particular problem. And the basic problem is we need access to our menu object, right? Because inside of our on options item selected, we need to write code that says, if this thing is checked, then make this group visible. If it's unchecked, make this group invisible. In order to do that, we need a reference to the menu object. How do we get a reference to the menu object? Well, you can't. Not from within the code as it stands. There's no way to reach in and grab a reference to the menu object. However, what you can do is you can alias out this parameter into a local field and reuse that field. It's basically considered to be the best practice to do it like this. So what you're doing is, when your options menu is created, we're going to basically lift up or steal this menu reference, and we're going to stuff it in a private field so that we can access it later. So, of course, that necessitates that we create a private field. So at the top of my file, I'm going to say private menu. Of course, I'm going to do private capital MENU inner so that the appropriate import statement appears at the top. And I'm going to name it lowercase menu. Then inside of onCreateOptions menu, I'm going to say this.menu equals menu. Now I've captured a reference to that menu object, and I can manipulate it even after the onCreateOptions menu has been invoked. So that's exciting. All right, so what do we want to do? Basically, what I want to do is I want to check to see if this thing was clicked, and if it was clicked, check to see whether or not it's checked. Depending on if it was checked, I want to go ahead and show or hide that group. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another if-else to this if-else block. I'm going to say if item.getID, item ID, equals r.id.activity main. So now you see why I named it. So I can say activity main menu show group. Oh, come on. You can't be that terrible at formatting. There we go. Oh, come on. Almost introduced a bit of a bug there. Okay, so now we have additional code that's going to be written if our item ID is an activity main menu show group, which is this guy right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say menu dot, and I'm going to say set group visible. For the group ID, I am extraordinarily, not surprisingly, going to pass in r.id.activity main menu group. Now you know why I named it like that. And then for the second parameter, I'm going to pass in is checked. See, I can, no, not is checkable, is checked. I almost introduced a second bug into this code. Okay, what is going on here? Well, we are invoking the setGroupVisible method, which, not surprisingly, sets the group to be visible or not. And we're passing in, for our Boolean value, we're passing in item.isChecked. So item.isChecked is going to always be what the item was clicked to become. That was a really convoluted sentence. What I'm trying to say is, by the time the code reaches this particular point, the item.isChecked method is already going to be set to the value it should be. So for example, if the isChecked was false when this method was invoked, and you clicked on the item, this code will turn it into true. Then item.isChecked will return true, which is what we expect. So the order is important. The fact that we're performing this code up here first is significant for this to work as expected. Of course, there's one thing that I'm missing right here, but we'll take a look how to fix it in a moment. Let's go ahead and verify that this works so far. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And I've just given up trying to not call it anything other than play. It is play for all intents and purposes. We're in Unity now. Can't you see? And I'm going to go open up my my options menu, and you'll notice, first of all, right off the bat, you'll notice a problem here. Show group is unchecked, but the group is still visible. Let's ignore that for right now. Let's go ahead and kind of fix it there. Okay, so show group is now checked, and the group is now visible, so that's good. We'll fix the other issue here in a second. Now let's uncheck it. And the group is invisible. Let's check it. Group is visible. Uncheck it. Group is... Okay, not too exciting. You generally use a different mechanism to check or to show or unshow a group, but the point is here's an example of me not only using a checkbox but also using groups, because that's how good I am at coming up with examples. So let's go ahead and do one more thing before I fix that one problem. I want to do set group enabled instead of set group visible. It basically will do the exact same thing. Difference is instead of going invisible, it's going to become disabled, which will get us take a look at what that looks like here in a second. So now you see the group is disabled, and I can't click on any of these items. You'll notice that even my click handler listener doohickey isn't even firing because, well, these items are disabled. All right, let's go ahead and fix that problem. The problem is when the application starts, the group is either going to be visible or enabled, but the checkbox is going to be false. So how do we fix this? How do we reconcile this problem? Well, this gives me an opportunity to bring in yet another important concept, and that is, given a menu object, how do we find a menu item? I actually just literally gave away the code. Basically, what we got to do is on our onCreateOptions menu code right here, what I have to do is I have to go in and I'm going to set the group enabled depending on whether or not that item was checked. Now, why don't I just go down here onto my group and I say enabled equals false? I could do that. So the group defaults to disabled, right? That makes sense. The group defaults to being disabled and the checkbox defaults to being false. But what if in the future I might want to be like, hey, you know what? It makes sense for this checkbox to be on by default. So let's go ahead and set it's checked to true, right? But now we have a checkbox and a disabled group. So how do we fix this? Well, generally with problems like these, my favorite solution, the most robust solution, is to make it so no matter if we have this set to check to true or check to false, at runtime, when the menu is created, this will be updated. This group will be updated. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove those two attributes so the code's just like it was before. And I'm going to jump back into main activity. And on the create options menu, I'm going to detect whether or not the show group menu item was defaulted to true or false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say menu item, or I'm probably going to have to import that. Show group item equals menu. And so how would we, given a menu, find an item? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Menu.find item. And that gives us, we can pass in an ID here. So the ID is going to be r.id.activity main, and then we want menu show group. Then what I'll do is I'll say menu set group enabled, passing in the group ID of RID activity main menu group, and show group item dot get, or sorry, is checked. Being really, really slow today. I'm sorry, guys. All right, let's go ahead and hit play, and we will observe this code working. Hopefully, unless I failed completely miserably with Android. And as you see, show group, the group is disabled. And if I defaulted show group to being true, I'm going to do this really quickly. Set it's checked to true, hit play. Wait a year or two. For Gradle to Gradle. Do its Gradle-y things. And now you see it's checked and the group is enabled. Pretty exciting. Okay, so I'm gonna go words. I'm gonna go ahead and leave that enabled so that the group is enabled when we open it up. And I'm gonna show you another cool thing you can do with groups. So check this out. Let's say we wanted to introduce a radio button. So if you guys aren't familiar, a radio button is simply a group of buttons where only one button can be selected at a time. And it's funny, like I've actually have physically manipulated radio buttons before, like actual physical radio buttons that you'd find on the side of a Walkman or something, but it's been like a decade. Anyway, so how do we do that? Well, basically the first thing we do is we start off with a group and with items inside the group. And then we simply specify a property on the group called checkable behavior. Now we can set it to all, for example, which basically, which basically just turns all the items inside the group into checkboxes. By the way, this would be a really cool technique for if you have a bunch of items that sometimes have checkboxes and sometimes don't, put them in a group. Or we can set the checkable behavior to none, which is the default. Not surprisingly, the checkable behavior of none makes no checkboxes appear. Or we can do single, and single will make them appear as radio buttons. Now the cool thing about single, if I go ahead and hit play, is it behaves in the way you would expect. And we can check the is checked, just like what we did with that checkbox. Not really a whole lot more to say about radio buttons. I do want to point out one thing, though. It is not a compiler error to have the group not have an ID. Which I find weird, because a group is pretty useless without an ID. I want to point out that if you ever make a group, always put an ID, even if the IDE doesn't tell you to. Do you know why? Because you will observe some very bizarre behavior if you have two groups without IDs. So let's say I have two groups, they both have their radio buttons. And so the second group, I'll go ahead and put 2 as a suffix for each one of these. And I'll show you guys how this fails. If I can find my window, which decided to appear behind... There we go. Some Z ordering nonsense. Oh, of course, my code won't compile because I removed that ID. My bad. Let's go ahead and quickly comment out. Which commenting out code is not something I would generally recommend doing, but when you're trying to do a demonstration and which was supposed to be already done, you kind of have no choice other than to make some concessions while I talk to stall for time. Okay, so we have now a bunch of these groups. So we have 2 groups, and each one has 3 radio buttons each. Now watch what happens when I click on that radio button. That's good. Only one got selected. Now let's click on delete. That's good. Only one got selected. Now let's click on delete 2. Ah, that's not good. We have 2 different groups. 2 different groups with their own set of items. And now you see that they're conflicting with each other as far as who gets to be the one item that's checked. How do we fix this? Well, I kind of already gave away the answer to this problem. You give your groups IDs, which is good practice anyway. So let's go ahead and... I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to restart IntelliJ here. It's having some major performance problems. Like these performance problems like rival Visual Studio and ReSharper combined. Activity main menu group... Sorry. Apparently it really doesn't like backspaces either. Oh, come on. It's seriously going to do this at the end of the video, isn't it? I'm going to pause it, but I'll resume when I have this typed. Alright, well that took a whole lot longer than it should have to type in a couple ID attributes, but I did get them typed in, and I did get it launched, and I'm about to show you guys it working properly. So as you can see now, with IDs, our groups are working properly. Anyway, I just think that the checkboxes and the radio buttons are really cool features. I think they're worth knowing about, and I think that it's very important to understand some of the gotchas involved with dealing with them. But I think that's just about it. There are some more things I want to talk about app bars. I'm not done yet. So in the next video, I think we're going to be talking about things like submenus and fragments, because I think those are important to understand as well. So I guess we'll see you guys in the next video.